the chaos of war. The skies above Earth roared with the sound of engines and explosions. A thick, acrid smoke filled the air, casting an eerie orange glow over the war-torn landscape below. Crumbling skyscrapers, once proud symbols of human achievement, now lay in ruins, reduced to twisted metal and broken glass. The ground shuddered with each explosion, sending shockwaves through the rubble-strewn streets where the final stand was being made. Human soldiers, encased in sleek, futuristic armor that shimmered under the faint sunlight, fought with desperate resolve. Their exosuits enhanced their strength and reflexes, but even this cutting-edge technology struggled to hold back the relentless tide of invaders. The alien army surged forward like a dark wave. They were tall, insect-like creatures, towering over the humans with limbs that resembled sharp blades. Their bodies gleamed like polished steel, reflecting the chaotic battlefield around them. Their movements were quick, almost mechanical, a testament to their evolution as apex predators in the universe. Red eyes, glowing with an unfeeling intensity, scanned the horizon as they advanced, their mandibles clicking in unison, creating a sound like the chittering of 1,000 insects. The noise was unsettling, adding to the already nightmarish scene. At the front lines, a group of human soldiers held their position, shields raised and weapons drawn. Their commander, a grizzled veteran named Captain Harris, barked orders through the comms, his voice hoarse from hours of combat. He stood at the center, his helmet visor cracked, revealing a hardened face lined with scars and exhaustion. He fired his plasma rifle with deadly precision, the blue beams cutting through the smoke and finding their mark in the alien horde. Yet for every alien that fell, 3 more seemed to take its place. "Hold the line," Harris shouted, though his voice was filled more with grim determination than confidence. He knew the reality of their situation. The aliens were better equipped, stronger, and seemingly endless in number. Earth had become a battleground for powers far beyond humanity's understanding, a pawn in a cosmic game of dominance. The irony was not lost on him. Humanity, once so proud and united in its advancements, now found itself struggling for mere survival against a foe it barely understood. Across the battlefield, the alien Commander Vorkal watched the skirmish with a detached, almost clinical interest. To him, this was not a battle. It was an extermination, a necessary step in claiming this resource-rich world for his people. His species, the Xylith, had long since eradicated emotions and empathy from their society, seeing them as weaknesses. Vorkal's exoskeletal armor glinted in the dim light as he issued orders with sharp, precise clicks of his mandibles, relaying commands through a shared neural link. He found the humans' resistance almost quaint, like a primitive creature fighting against an inevitable extinction. "Advance! Eradicate them," he commanded, his tone devoid of any semblance of mercy. But then, something unexpected happened. A small figure stepped out from behind a crumbling wall, stumbling slightly as he navigated the debris-strewn street. It was a child, a boy, no older than 4, with tousled blonde hair and bright blue eyes. He seemed completely at ease, his face lit up with a smile as he licked a brightly colored ice cream cone covered in rainbow sprinkles. The boy, named Tommy, hummed a cheerful tune, blissfully unaware of the chaos that surrounded him. He might have been at a summer fair, the way he licked his ice cream and skipped through the rubble. The battlefield fell into a stunned silence, if only for a moment. Human soldiers, frozen in mid-action, stared in disbelief. Captain Harris lowered his weapon, blinking in shock. "What the hell?" he muttered, unable to process the sight before him. Even the alien invaders, who had never encountered anything like this, hesitated. Their red eyes flickered as they registered the child, unarmored and defenseless, walking calmly amidst the carnage. Vorkal's gaze locked onto the boy, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. He had seen countless worlds and fought in hundreds of battles, but never had he witnessed something so absurd, so out of place. He paused, issuing a silent command to his troops. The Xylith warriors halted their advance, their mandibles clicking in confusion as they looked to their leader for direction. And there, in the middle of a battlefield soaked with blood and fire, little Tommy sat down on a piece of rubble, happily licking his ice cream, oblivious to the fact that he had just paused a war. For the first time in hours, the battlefield fell silent. The clamor of gunfire, the whistling of rockets, and the hissing clicks of alien communication all came to an abrupt halt. Soldiers on both sides lowered their weapons, exchanging uncertain glances. The sight of the small child, completely unperturbed by the destruction around him, had created a ripple of confusion that swept through the ranks. Human troops, shouting frantically for Tommy to get to safety, were struck speechless as they realized the aliens had also stopped their advance. "Hold fire! Cease fire!" Captain Harris ordered, his voice shaky as he raised a hand, signaling the temporary truce. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, but the surreal nature of the moment demanded a pause. He activated his comms, sending a quick, frantic message to the other units to hold their positions. Across the battlefield, human soldiers peered out from behind barricades, their fingers still hovering over triggers, not quite trusting the quiet. On the alien side, the Xylith warriors stood motionless, their insect-like bodies poised in mid-attack. Vorkal, their commander, narrowed his eyes as he scanned the field. This wasn't a trick or an ambush. It was something completely unprecedented. He sent a neural pulse to his troops, ordering them to hold. The silence stretched on, filled only with the distant crackling of fires and the occasional rumble of crumbling buildings. Vorkal, usually a beacon of stoic resolve, found himself staring at the small human child in disbelief. Tommy, blissfully unaware of the tension he had caused, plopped himself down on a piece of broken concrete, happily licking his ice cream. The colorful sprinkles were melting, dripping onto his hands and chin, but he didn't seem to mind. He looked around, taking in the scene with the curious, innocent eyes of a child who saw the world as a place of wonder rather than danger. He giggled, pointing at the alien soldiers who stood frozen. "Look, Mama! Big, shiny bugs!" he called out, his voice echoing across the battlefield. Captain Harris flinched at the sound, then looked to his men. They were tense, gripping their weapons as if expecting the truce to break at any second. He slowly stepped forward, approaching Tommy with his hands raised, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Hey there, buddy," Harris said softly, forcing a smile. "We need to get you out of here. It's not safe." But Tommy just giggled again, as if the entire scene was a game he didn't quite understand. On the other side, Vorkal watched, feeling a flicker of something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. The Xylith were a species of pure logic and efficiency. They had no use for emotions or sentiments. Yet here he was, staring at a human child who showed no fear, only joy. It was as if Tommy existed in a bubble separate from the violence that defined this world. Vorkal's neural link buzzed with questions from his subcommanders, but he ignored them, stepping forward himself. As the alien commander approached, Tommy's eyes lit up with delight. He looked up at the towering figure of Vorkal, his ice cream cone held out like an offering. "You want some?" Tommy asked, beaming. The child's smile was as bright as the sprinkles on his ice cream. He held the cone up higher, offering it to Vorkal as if this was the most natural thing in the world. The human soldiers held their breath. Captain Harris took a step back, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. Was this it? Was this the moment the aliens would resume their attack, crushing the boy and the last remnants of their defenses? But Vorkal didn't move to strike. Instead, he hesitated, his metal-clad hand, sharp and deadly, hovered above the ice cream cone. He tilted his head, examining the colorful, melting dessert as if it were some foreign object he had never seen before. In a way, it was. The Xylith knew nothing of Earth's customs or its simple joys. Vorkal's mandibles clicked together, not in aggression, but in confusion. The child's act was completely without motive, without strategy. It was pure kindness. Slowly, almost cautiously, Vorkal took the ice cream cone from Tommy's hand. He stared at it, holding it delicately between his claws, as if it were a piece of fragile alien technology. Silence blanketed the battlefield as every eye, human and alien, watched the exchange in stunned amazement. The gesture was small, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of the war. Yet it carried with it a profound message, one that transcended language or species. In that moment, the battlefield, scarred by destruction and hatred, felt different. The air was heavy not with the threat of violence, but with a fleeting sense of something new, a fragile hope born from the innocent, untainted heart of a child. Vorkel's hand, still holding the dripping ice cream cone, trembled ever so slightly. The gesture might have seemed insignificant to any observer unaware of the Xylith's rigid societal norms. But to the alien soldiers standing on the battlefield, it was nothing short of a seismic event. They were a race bred for war, trained to follow orders without hesitation, their minds linked in a collective network of cold logic. Yet now, they stood in stunned silence, witnessing their commander, a symbol of their unyielding discipline, accepting a gift from a tiny human child. The murmurs started as a ripple, soft and hesitant, passing through the ranks of the Xylith warriors. It was a sound that had never been heard on the battlefield before, the uncertain whispers of soldiers questioning their purpose. They exchanged glances, mandibles clicking in confusion as they tried to process what they were seeing. Vorkel's neural network buzzed with frantic queries from his subcommanders, demanding an explanation. But Vorkel ignored them, staring down at the melting ice cream cone as if it held the secrets of the universe. On the human side, the response was equally bewildered. Captain Harris, watching from a few paces away, felt a strange mixture of disbelief and hope. He'd seen countless battles, each one more brutal than the last, but he'd never seen anything like this. He glanced back at his own men, noticing their tense expressions beginning to soften. Weapons that had been raised and ready to fire were now being lowered, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. The sight of their enemy, standing still and unthreatening, had a disarming effect. Harris stepped forward, carefully choosing his words as he addressed Vorkel. "Commander," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the field, but soft enough not to shatter the fragile peace. "Perhaps it's time we reconsider this conflict. Just for a moment." Vorkel's gaze snapped up, his sharp, glowing eyes meeting Harris's. There was a brief flicker of something unrecognizable in the alien's expression, something almost like doubt. He was a being who had been taught to view all humans as primitive aggressors, an obstacle to be eliminated. Yet here he stood, holding an ice cream cone offered in innocent kindness. The rigid lines of his logic were bending under the pressure of this new, incomprehensible reality. "Talk!" Vorkel's voice, usually a harsh, metallic rasp, was softer now, laced with genuine curiosity. "In the middle of a war?" Harris nodded, gesturing to the child between them. "If a little boy can walk through this battlefield and offer you a gift, maybe we can find it within ourselves to do something different, just this once." The alien commander looked down at Tommy, who was now drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick, blissfully unaware of the historic moment he had inadvertently created. Vorkel's mandibles clicked together, not in anger, but in contemplation. He had never felt this way before. For the first time in his life, he was experiencing something akin to wonder, a curiosity about these strange creatures who could fight so fiercely yet show such inexplicable tenderness. "Very well," Vorkel said slowly, the decision shocking even himself. "We will talk." The human and alien commanders stood side by side, with Tommy sitting between them, a living symbol of innocence that had somehow managed to bridge the vast cultural divide between their species. The battlefield, once filled with violence and hatred, now felt different, almost peaceful. Harris signaled for his men to lower their weapons completely, and they did so, exchanging nervous, incredulous looks. Some of the soldiers even began to chuckle quietly, unable to believe the absurdity of the situation unfolding before their eyes. On the other side, the Xylith warriors were equally bewildered. They looked to their commander, then at each other, the neural link buzzing with uncertainty. Vorkel's behavior was entirely unprecedented. Never before had a Xylith leader engaged in a dialogue with an enemy, let alone held an ice cream cone. It was a breach of protocol, so severe it left them momentarily adrift, questioning everything they had been taught about the humans they were fighting. One alien soldier, bolder than the rest, stepped forward, mandibles clicking hesitantly as he deactivated his plasma rifle. He tilted his head, observing the human soldiers who were laughing and shaking their heads in disbelief. The alien's eyes flicked back to Tommy, who was now offering him a pebble with a smile, as if it were a precious gem. The soldier reached out, taking the small stone with a cautious nod. It was a small, simple exchange, but it carried with it the weight of something much larger, a crack in the wall of hostility that had divided the two species. Harris glanced over at Vorkal, a tentative smile on his face. "Maybe there's hope for us yet," he said almost to himself. Vorkal didn't respond immediately. He was still processing the flood of new emotions and thoughts running through his neural network. Finally, he nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps," he admitted, the word feeling strange on his tongue. He looked back at his own soldiers, their rigid postures now visibly softening as they watched the interaction between the commanders. For the first time, the Xylith and the humans found themselves standing together, not as enemies, but as beings capable of more than just destruction. The moment was fragile, fleeting, but it was real, and it had all started with a child in an ice cream cone. The decision, the battlefield moments ago filled with the deafening roar of weapons and the cries of war, now lay silent. Vorkal, still holding the remnants of the melting ice cream cone, took a deep breath. His metallic frame, usually rigid with purpose, seemed almost softened by the encounter. The alien commander raised one arm, signaling his troops to stand down. His voice, transmitted through the neural link to every Xylith soldier, was calm, yet carried a weight it had never borne before. "Cease the attack," Vorkal commanded. "We are done here." A wave of shock rippled through the alien ranks. This was not an order they had expected, nor one they had ever received before. Their weapons powered down with hesitant beeps, the glow of plasma rifles fading as the soldiers looked to one another, uncertain but compliant. Across the battlefield, the human forces mirrored this action. Captain Harris, seeing Vorkal's signal, nodded to his own troops. "Stand down," he called out, raising a hand. "We're withdrawing." There was a collective exhale, as if the entire field of combatants had been holding their breath. Soldiers who had been ready to kill mere moments before now looked at each other with a mix of disbelief and relief. The tension that had filled the air began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, almost eerie calm. The child's legacy. Tommy, the small boy who had unknowingly become the catalyst for this unprecedented truce, continued to hum a cheerful tune. He skipped around the rubble, entirely oblivious to the monumental impact he had just made. The ice cream cone had long since melted away, leaving sticky trails down his hand, but he didn't seem to care. With a carefree grin, he looked up at the alien commander, giving him a friendly wave. "Bye-bye, shiny bug," Tommy chirped, giggling as he turned to go. The human soldiers, many of whom had tears in their eyes, couldn't help but laugh at the child's innocent farewell. Captain Harris knelt down, ruffling the boy's hair. "You take care, kid," he said softly, watching as Tommy ran off in search of his family, completely unaware that he had just brokered a peace more profound than any diplomat could have hoped for. Harris stood up, feeling a swell of emotion he hadn't expected. He watched the child disappear into the distance, a tiny figure against the backdrop of a war-torn city. "It seems," he murmured to himself, "that sometimes the smallest voices can carry the loudest message." Vorkal's reflection. As the Xylith forces retreated in formation, Vorkal lingered for a moment, still clutching the empty cone. He turned it over in his hand, studying the sticky residue as if it held answers to questions he hadn't known he was asking. For the first time, the rigid lines of his thoughts wavered. He had always believed in the absolute superiority of his race, in their logic and precision, in their emotionless efficiency. Yet, here was a human child, fragile, innocent, and seemingly insignificant, who had shown him something profound. Vorkal glanced back at the human commander, locking eyes with Harris across the empty space. The two shared a silent moment of understanding, a nod of respect passing between them. Vorkel's mandibles clicked softly as he turned away, heading back to his ship. He knew he would have to report this encounter, but it would not be a report of victory or defeat. No, this time, his message would carry something far more valuable, a glimmer of hope for a future where conflict might be replaced by understanding. On the bridge of his ship, Vorkel activated the communication relay, his fingers hesitating over the controls. To the High Council, he began, his voice unusually soft. I am sending a report, not of conquest, but of something unexpected. Perhaps it is time we reconsider our path. The ripple effect continues. Years later, the story of the child and the ice cream cone became legend. Across the galaxy, it was retold in countless variations. The tale of a little boy who had walked fearlessly through a battlefield and, with a simple gesture of kindness, changed the course of history. Diplomats spoke of it during tense negotiations, using it as a symbol of the potential for peace. Soldiers shared it around campfires, marveling at the absurdity and beauty of the moment. Even the Xylith, once a race that prided itself on its lack of emotion, began to tell the story to their young, as a reminder that there was more to the universe than conquest. In the end, it was not a grand strategy or a mighty weapon that brought an end to the conflict. It was the pure, unblemished innocence of a child who had seen no enemies, only new friends. The image of Vorkel, the fearsome alien commander, standing on a battlefield with an ice cream cone in hand, became a symbol of hope, proof that, even in the darkest times, a small act of kindness could light the way to a brighter future. And somewhere, out there in the stars, a small boy named Tommy continued to live his life, unaware that he had become a legend, a beacon of peace in a war-torn universe.